Welcome to Flying Minds, where we navigate the world of aviation. I'm your host, Stefan Grisbrook. Today I'm joined by a former colleague with many nicknames like Hammer, Norty, and a few others. He has been instrumental in pushing me to do this podcast for many different reasons, some of which we will discuss today. Get ready to meet Warren, a pilot whose roots run deep in the prairies of Saskatchewan. Growing up, farm-grown, Warren first took to the skies alongside his dad's crop dusting business, igniting a lifelong passion for aviation. Before conquering the skies in jets, he honed his skill as a Canadian bush pilot, navigating the rugged wilderness and mastering the art of flying in challenging conditions. From those dusty fields and untamed landscapes, he soared to over 10,000 hours of safe flight time, commanding aircraft like the MD-83, CRJ-900, and the Boeing 737. With a career spanning technical standards, simulator instruction, and safety management, Warren has made flying safer and teams stronger by developing CRM and human factors programs. Today, he's not just a captain, but also a simulator instructor at Dehavilland Aircraft of Canada, inspiring the next generation of aviators. Beyond the cockpit, Warren is a vibrant mix of loud, intrepid energy and quiet, empathetic depth. A fun-loving, opinionated soul, he stands firm on free speech, authenticity, freedom, and accountability. Join me today on the Flying Minds podcast for a ride through his incredible journey, from a Saskatchewan farm boy through the Canadian bush to the skies and beyond. Sit back and relax, insert the flat metal portion into the buckle, and hang on because it's about to get rough and wild. All right, here we are, Flying Minds. I want to thank the talented, opinionated, outspoken friend of mine, Warren. Thank you, Warren, for taking the time to come
Happy
to
to
Flying
be here, man.
Minds.
This is gonna be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's been 3.5 years we've known each other.
Yeah, time flies, eh?
It feels like 10.
Yeah, it does. I was thinking longer.
There you go. Okay, well, let's get
right into it.
Right into this. So let's talk about, first off, how you got into aviation.
I was thinking about this morning, actually, because I was like, when did I want to become a pilot and why? And I think the only thing honestly, man, I think that my dad,
he was a pilot.
He was a pilot. Yeah. I remember I think he got a subscription to Aviation magazine. And I grew up with
Flying magazine. I remember having my Flying magazine.
I think that's what it was. Yeah. The Flying magazine.
Yeah.
So he had that, and he decided to get his pilot's license. He would have been around 40 or so. And of course it was right around when Top Gun came out, right?
Around
first
40.
Top.
How old
Top
are you?
Gun.
Oh, do you want to talk?
I'm 51. 51.
So 11 years.
So I think Top Gun came out in the early 80s. So I would have run around 8 to 10 to 12, somewhere in there.
Okay.
You know, and yeah, so I was probably influenced by that, but more
influenced
so
by Top Gun or your dad?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Because I remember studying fighter jets, right? And I remember in high school trying to knowing that the Canadian Air Force really didn't hire a lot of pilots, and my odds of getting a job in the military was better in the US. So I worked actually quite hard to try and get sponsored. So I was trying to meet people in the US, and this was back in the, late 80s, early 90s, to sponsor me. And my parents knew some people, but it was just too hard. So it wasn't going to happen. Right. So I wanted to get sponsored and join the, the Marines or the Air Force or some right. One of the military bodies down there. But of course it didn't happen. And I didn't have the I don't know if they weren't hiring in the Canadian military at the time. I can't remember now, but I remember we did a like career, like what would you be best at? That you do some tests and stuff in like grade 10, and it came out. I remember pilot, cook, and some other thing, right? So it worked out perfectly. So I could either be a cook or a pilot. So, so my dad, anyways, so yeah, going back now till when I was probably before I was 10 years old, my dad got his pilot's license. And I didn't know at the time that I thought he was just doing it for fun, but he was doing it to actually start spraying his own crops. And
So let's go back there. So this is in Saskatchewan.
in southeast
So
Saskatchewan.
you grew up as a farm boy.
Yeah, I grew up in a town of about 900 people, just west of it, about 4 or 5 miles, and
West of Saskatoon?
Rocanville, which is kind of where the number one highway, Trans-Canada Highway, and the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border intersect, that northwest quadrant right in there.
Oh, okay.
And that's where I grew up, and we had land, and my parents were raised there, and my grandparents, that's where they settled, and their parents came here off that boat, I guess.
So you grew up on a farm. So
Grew up on a farm, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, yeah, so Dad actually, I don't know if you've ever seen these, but these ultralights.
Yeah.
So Dad bought an ultralight kit
And built it.
and we built it, him and I built it in the garage.
Okay.
And literally he put the wing, when we were done, I can still remember the day we pushed the thing. We had of course the wings weren't attached, but everything but the wings and it weren't attached. It had a tri-prop and it had engine was on the back hanging upside down. It was a Bombardier Skidoo engine, Rotax,
Okay.
with a 3-bladed prop and manual variable pitch. So you could change the pitch depending on where you were, elevation and whatnot. And I suppose, I'm not even sure why you would do it, but anyways, so we pushed this thing out of the garage, bolted the wings on and the struts, and he jumped in it and literally flew off the lane. And he just had maybe a private pilot's license, like maybe.
Well, you didn't need a private.
Well, he had a private pilot's license because he did the training as a private to get a pilot's license, right? Yes, yeah. But at the time you didn't even need a pilot's license.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I would have been around 10 now because I think I was just getting into high school, maybe 12 or something like that. But anyways, long story short, yeah. So he just flew off this thing, and I was just like, thought that was normal, and was just blown away by this, and I was just infatuated with this thing, and.
So did you ever fly it?
I learned to fly it before I was even had a driver's license. So, yeah, we would go up, and nobody believes this stuff, but we would go up to 10,000 feet in this thing, and Rocanville's at about 1,500 feet ASL. We'd fly up to 10,000 feet because it had a 10-to-1 glide ratio. My dad smoked, and he would like shut the engine off, and we just sit up there and fly in thermals with no engine.
What was
just gliding?
What was the wingspan on?
I can't remember. I don't know. Probably just guessing 30 feet. Wow. Maybe that's way too much. Yeah. Well, yeah, probably about 30 feet. Yeah, it probably is. Yeah.
So it was a tandem seat.
It was tandem seat. It was a RX 550 Beaver, and you could get amphib floats for these things. You could get, and it was kind of like a tricycle gear, but it sat back on its tail as a tail dragger. But once the engine started, the engine pushed it up onto its nose wheel, and away you went. It had differential braking is how you steered it with the rudder. That's all you had. The nose wheel didn't steer or anything.
Right.
And yeah, so we'd go on, fly around with this thing, and he actually converted it into a crop duster. We had a 40-liter tank that was bolted into the back of the back seat, and we got these nozzles, which were actually like mini turbine engines that would atomize the spray, so you could have a very concentrated spray to water ratio, and then the system would put it out through these little nozzles, which would create a really fine mist. And we sprayed our crops with that. And literally, I remember Dad would have us walking. We'd be the flaggers, and we'd walk, and he'd buzz over us, and you'd have a little bicycle wheel with a counter, and you'd walk 15 clicks, and then you'd stop, and then he'd line up on you, and then you'd move out of the, drop your bike and move out of the way while he'd fly by, and then you go pick your bike up and walk 15 more clicks. And we sprayed all our crops like that.
And how long did you guys do it like that?
I think he scared himself a couple times. I remember he crashed in the canola a couple times, like just went down into the crop and
too low.
Yeah. And I think he just scared himself. And because one year he just decided, I'm selling this thing. So I think I actually, to be honest, I should talk to him about that. But because I was like, man, I wish I didn't really understand how cool of a toy we had until it was gone, right?
So did you maybe change your career expectations, want to be an accountant or?
Well, by that point, I was hooked. Like, I didn't even think that I was going to be a pilot for like a for pay, I guess. I just loved flying. I loved airplanes.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to do.
So did you do your private license out in the area then?
Well, I actually didn't start right out of high school. I took like initially I was like I went over to Australia for a year doing some agriculture stuff. Was over there on a farm, did this egg exchange where you go there, one of their people come here, and worked on one of their big wheat farms there for a year. And that was pretty cool. But was always thinking about flying back then. I remember talking about it with the guy who owned the farm there I worked for. So it was always on my mind. And then I got back to Canada and went and worked on the rigs up in Tumbler Ridge and High Level and up in Zama Lake up in northern Alberta and BC. Because my sister, all our friends, her friends from like the area I was from that came out here, worked on the rigs and kind of did that. And I did that for a year and then kind of saw, wow, I don't want to, this is way too hard, this work.
Let me interrupt you there just for a sec, because as you're talking here, telling me this story. So I grew up in a small town.
Right.
And my family had a trucking business.
Whereabouts?
In Brooks, Alberta.
Oh, right on.
And we hauled drilling fluids for the for the rigs and pipe and moved rigs.
That's cool, sort of man.
And then I went to college and I wanted to be a doctor. And I spent too much time partying and chasing young ladies.
Yeah.
And then my
well, that was really my career planning was based off of that.
Yeah. And so my father said, okay, enough of that, you're coming home. So I went back to the business. And what got me into aviation was, it wasn't that I wanted to be a pilot. I just knew what I didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to drive truck. I didn't want to work in the oil industry. Probably the wrong choice. Looking back, I probably could have done quite well, but I went and
absolutely. When you say that right now, I'm just like thinking like what a great opportunity that would have been. Same thing I think of when I was farming with my dad. I had no idea the opportunity. Most kids probably don't, but I didn't for sure.
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to get away from there.
Yeah.
And looking back on it now, because farming in those days when I grew up was hard. Like I remember now I look back and I have a lot of appreciation for my dad, the pressures he was under. Like we think we do have pressure, but when you got, your 3 young kids, a wife, and you basically got a crop, you lose your crop and you don't know how you're going to make your payments the next year. Like the strain that would have been, and we're talking back then, which today would have been millions of dollars, right? On the line, So I have a lot of appreciation for that, but I didn't realize the opportunity when we grow up in an entrepreneurial home like that. Looking back on it, are you the same? Like you look back on it, you go, wow, man, if I had known what I knew now.
100%. Yeah. I probably should have stayed in the trucking industry.
Well, shoulda, woulda, coulda, but that's where my head goes too. And maybe we can talk about that later, but yeah. So anyways, that's kind of how I learned to fly. I kind of knew how to fly an airplane before I even took a flying lesson.
So like
my dad said, I wanted to fly that thing so bad. So he said, I remember he gave me his From the Ground Up book. Basically, he says, you have to read this. If you read this, I'll train you how to fly it. And he did. And I read it.
So you worked in the oil industry and then you decided, okay, I got to go do something else.
Well, I still had that aviation bug in me.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the confidence when I was one, I wanted to be a military pilot because watching Top Gun, and that didn't come to fruition. Canadians weren't hiring, or they were, but it wasn't. I did lack the confidence to and the perseverance and to go through what needed to go through. Cause I came from a farm in Saskatchewan. It was just minimal people did that sort of thing left there. And if they did once in a while, there's actually one guy that did and made it in the military. And he was sort of my goal, but he ended up getting washed out for one reason or another early on in it. So, um, it just never happened, right? So I never actually thought it. But when I went up north and worked on the rigs, that was probably a really good opportunity for me because I saw what like you said, I'm like, I don't
Saw
want
what
to,
I didn't want to do. Yeah.
and you could see guys that made a good go of it, but I wasn't interested in it.
That's a tough life.
Yeah. And so that probably pushed me. And I'm like, you know what? I came home. I'm gonna become a pilot. At first it was to crop dust.
Yep.
Now I should say this, in that time, my mom's youngest sister married an Air Canada pilot. So that was probably the motivation too. I initially got in to do aerial applicating, and that was kind of my idea. And then once I got into the training, I went to Regina, Saskatchewan to just at the flying club there and started flying, learning how to fly, farmed in the off season, farmed in the spring and summer, harvest and fall. And then did my training in the winter and lived with my aunt and her husband, who was Air Canada pilot. So that's where I got the inspiration to go to the airlines. I never would have went to the airlines, but I listened to him. He made it sound great and wonderful and cool and all this money.
What was he flying at the time? Do you remember?
He was on the Airbus 32. He was just leaving he was on the DC captain on the, I think he was FO on the DC-9. He was FO on the DC-9, moved up to the 320 in this time. I was in high school still, probably moved to the 320 as a FO and then moved right to left seat in the 320. And this would have been in the early 90s. Yeah, early 90s. So he kind of went up he got hired at Air Canada at like 20 years old in the
right
80s. Yeah. One of those guys, right? Retired now. So
you got your license out of Regina, and then what was your first flying job? Commercial, paid to fly.
My first flying job was up in at Ursus Aviation in Toledo, Northwest Territories. Flying they had a 172, they had a 207, a Maul, and a Navajo, and then a couple of like smaller twins that
just charter work, is that?
Yeah. He was flying out of I got the job. I got my license done. I sent, like we all do, I sent out 1 million resumes to everybody.
Yeah.
And I remember it was harvest. We was in the combine, and I went into that night to the farm and to the house, and some guy had left a message for me. So it was the owner of Ursus, and he hired me because he was from Saskatchewan. He hired me for the sheer fact that I was from Saskatchewan, because he's like, those guys know how to work. So yeah. I'm going to hire him. And that really, I went up there and worked for Ursus for 2 years. And in that time, like looking back on it now, like we lived in an ATCO trailer on the airport site, which my room doubled as a nose hanger. Like I come home at night and there was parts on my bed, and there was no days off. It was no like what we deal with now. And it was a great start to my flying career. I look back on it now and I just like, thank God I'm still alive.
Yeah, no kidding, eh?
Yeah. So
Ursus 2 years, and then where?
Then I got a job. Worked at Ursus flying there, and then I was like, lived there I think I did 18 months solid up there. Like I was off a month in between. So it was close to 2 years I spent there. Then I got a job at Myndz. I don't know if you remember those guys.
No.
Myndz Air out of Manitoba, out of Winnipeg, but I was based on the Navajo. I got a job on the Navajo.
And that was in the late 90s?
No, that would have been in 2000 now.
Oh,
you're right. No, it was the late 90s. It would have been in 99, the year 1999.
Okay.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was based in Vancouver, so anything that happened east of Vancouver, I was very ignorant of. I didn't know what was going on.
So this was a standard, charter, Northern charter company. They had, I remember, Beach 1900s based out of Winnipeg that did sked runs up to where we were based, which was what's the name of the place? Stevenson Island. You remember Tom Brotherston that owned he owned that ground company that
Oh, in
handled links in
yeah,
Winnipeg?
in Winnipeg.
Well, he was involved in it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was involved in the company. His dad actually. So that's where I met him.
Okay.
He did a lot of the ground handling down in Winnipeg for the company. So yeah, so I was flying in Navajo there doing medevacs and some charters, and then while I was there, I got a King Air. Got on the King Air as a captain. So, and doing the same sort of work, and that's where I got my taste of aviation. Like we lived up in a crew house because when I was in Northwest Territories, I was basically with another pilot or on my own. So it was very solitaire job or in the community. So it's very, very different type of job. And this job at Mystic we was probably, I would say 12 pilots up there at once. So we just had a blast.
Right.
3 weeks in, 1 week out. And that's where I made some friends that I still have to this day. Met there, we're going back, 25 years, 30, going on 30 years.
Yeah.
To work at WestJet or Canada, it feels like yesterday, but that's where I think where it took grip. And then I just then I kind of got the bug to like get up to the jets, and that's the way it went.
Okay. So you're at Mystic. Is that right?
Yeah. And I've got a very checkered past of working for airlines that go broke. Now there's way more details in why I left Mystic or a lot of these different airlines, but and we can get into that another time.
Okay, so Mystic, and then you went to was it
Mystic, and then Ken Bork Air. But there was Bearskin Airlines in there too. Went to Bearskin after Mystic, and then that didn't work out, and we'll go, and then ended up at Ken Bork Air. So
yeah, Bearskin, they've been around forever.
Yeah,
they're still around.
On the Metro, right seat on the Metro.
The Metro. Well, if you survive flying the Metro, then you got some skills.
Yeah. So then I did that, and then went to Bork.
And you were at Bork for how long?
For a couple of years.
Yeah. And you flew.
This would have been 2000, somewhere in end of 2000, and then was on the King Air 200 and King Air 100, and that's when I moved to Calgary. That was my first. That was in 2001, and the only time I haven't been in Calgary was when I went to Toronto, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. But I went to Bork, and we did what was it again? I think it was 3 weeks in, 3 weeks out, 3 weeks in Iqaluit, and 3 weeks home. And you really didn't have to work when you're home usually, unless you put your hand up to say, "Hey, I'm open to fly."
3 weeks in Iqaluit, none of it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, doing medevacs. And I had what I thought was the greatest job, because on the King Air 200, you did medevac. So it was, and there's 2 or 3 crews. So it was 24-hour. It was manned 24 hours. And then there was 1 or 2 ships, couple 200s, I think, at the time. And so you weren't always on call. And when you were on call, you had to report within an hour. And anywhere in Iqaluit, you could report within 10 minutes. So we all had, I remember it was $200 a month for the racquetball club. And I was like, we were all professional racquetball players. We're the best shape of my life. And because you go up there sometimes and you'd fly maybe, I don't know what you'd fly, maybe 10 missions the whole time you're there. So, and anywhere from a 3-hour flight to a half-hour flight there and back.
Right.
That one way. That's one sector. So double that for round trip.
And you say Ken Bork for 2 years.
2 years. And at Ken Bork Air, I met a guy who his dad was flying at Royal Airlines. He was at Royal, and then at the time Jetsco started around 2000.
So that was in the early 2000s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gone in Canada. So
so this was in 2003, and this guy introduced me to his uncle, who was a training captain at Jetsco, who was from Royal Airlines. My buddy, Jason Huff, he introduced me to Marty, who's a trainer at Flair now. Marty Neely.
Oh, I saw Marty the other day.
Yeah. So Marty, so I went down and went down in one of my flights out. I normally would go to Calgary from Iqaluit. And this time I said, well, I'll go to Ottawa and then Toronto and meet with Marty. So I routed myself through Toronto and had dinner with Marty, got to know him and kept in touch. And he got me on at Jetsco. I think it was like the 3rd ground school there. So that airline. So I was like
So
in the top 20 guys at that airline as the first. I think I was one of the first non-jet pilots they flew there, that they hired there.
okay, so tell me who Jetsco was. What? Because I was in Japan by then, so I don't have a clue.
So
what were they doing? What was their plan?
So it started right around the time, very early, when WestJet, I think, started in late 90s.
96, I think.
So Jetsco started in 2001, so about 5 years later. Very similar idea.
Now, wasn't Greyhound in there somewhere as well?
Yeah, I know there was, but I honestly don't really remember how that whole, because
Jetsco started out at Toronto then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was so anyways, I got a job there, got hired, and first jet job, and went there as a first officer. Just thinking about it was January, I think, of 2003.
In a what airplane?
On the MD-83.
MD-83, okay.
Yeah, so it was January 2003, and I'd never been in a jet before. Actually, I'd been in the flight deck of the 737-200 Canadian North. I rode up there one time going up to Iqaluit. So that was my first experience in a flight deck of a bigger airplane, I guess. And so I got hired at Jetsco, loved it, had a great time. And they kind of went from, I know I was in the 3rd ground school, and then they expanded to, I think, a couple hundred pilots by the time it all went down.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So how many airplanes did they have?
I think, they went, when I think about it now, in 2 years, they went from, because they started in 2001, I think that airline only lasted for 2.5 years. They had 30 tails.
In 2 years?
In 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and two different fleets, MD-83s and F-100s.
Oh, so the F-100s must have came from, and I may be getting this wrong, and anybody that's listening to this that knows this history, let me know. I think Air Quebec or Quebec Air had the Fokker 100s.
Yeah.
Because years ago,
could have
Time Air, which became Canadian Regional Airlines, we had the F-28s. They got some F-28s out there, and we trained them, but they also had some of the 100s, F-100s.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where they came from, but probably. I know some of the airplanes, the MDs, I think they came from Korean Airlines. There's some kind of Korean outfit at the time, but anyways, so and then I ended up getting a captain seat on that thing pretty quick early on. I only had maybe 500 hours on type. My first.
What was your total time when you started there?
Around 3,000 hours, maybe a little under.
Wow. So you're an MD-83 captain with 500 hours on type.
In 35, around 3,500 hours. Yeah. Good not having a clue, like,
put that,
when I look back on
that in
now,
perspective.
at the time, I was, I remember there's a lot of people at the time that were like, oh, these guys are, unsafe, and maybe the airline was unsafe as any other airline. But from our perspective as a pilot, I was doing the job to my best of my ability. And the guys that signed me off were very experienced, guys that flow metal all over the planet. So,
well, Marty was there, and he's been in this industry longer than me. And he's one of our instructors.
Yeah, exactly.
He's very good. Yeah.
So anyways, so that was my first experience doing that. And then, of course, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, the airline didn't work out like many of them do. And ended up at WestJet. Got to WestJet, lasted 2 years there. And it isn't WestJet's fault. I just wasn't happy. I didn't want to be in the right seat. I don't know that it was more the right seat. Even if I went as a direct entry captain, I don't want to sound, there's probably a bit of ego involved in it. But at the time.
Did you get hired as a direct entry?
At where?
WestJet?
WestJet? No, no,
No,
no,
no. Okay.
no. They weren't doing that. I was hired as a first officer,
Okay.
and WestJet was a really at that time, very organized. I thought, anyways, very organized, cool place, and I was happy to be there, and kind of was wanted to root in there and be there long term. And but I had at that time in my life, I had a whole bunch of other stuff going on, and I always questioned coming from a far. I always like there's always this part of me that didn't like to work for somebody else, and that's probably. And I was always fascinated by the financial markets and working in on a farm, and we'd sell grain, and I'd live. I spent most of my youth in a grain elevator listening to farmers talk about grain prices, right?
Right.
And when they're going to, and not knowing anything about it, but absorbing that information. So I always had this kind of motivation to understand why the markets work. So I actually left WestJet without a flying job. Started in this company, in this financial marketing company, selling insurance and mutual funds, and that was kind of I went into that. The timing, if you think about it, I went into it in 2008, the fall of 2008, beginning of the housing crisis, the global housing crisis.
See, again, I had just moved back to Canada in 2007. I was living in North Vancouver. So I was just into that there. So, but I've been out of the country for quite a while. So,
Oh yeah, okay.
So 2008, you're into the markets, and
yeah, I was starting to get in, and I saw a future there, and got caught up by it. And it's a lot of my personality too. Is I'm got a lot of energy, and when I focus on get really interested in something, that's all I want to do. And that's good and bad.
we can get into that later.
So anyways, 2008, and then there was of course that U.S. housing crisis, and I also I'm not blaming it on that. I'm looking at it going, holy shit, this is going to be way harder than I thought.
Right.
I was going into this thinking it was going to be like I'll be cashing checks, and
piece of cake,
snapping necks, and it wasn't like that at all. It was really.
So difficult. How long did you do that?
Well, I did that for about. I would say I've been doing it ever since. I stopped doing it for that company, but I've followed the markets ever since, to a degree. But at the time, I was like, I got to get back into. I got to get a job. So I got a job, and at the time, Enerjet was starting.
And Enerjet, Tim Morgan.
Yeah. So at WestJet, I did my training at the time, just by chance. My in the ground school was Don Bell. He was one of the founders.
Founders of WestJet.
At WestJet, yeah. So he was transitioning off the 200 and doing his 7.3 NG PPC, or his type rating. So I was in his ground school. So I got to know him, and quit WestJet and phoned him up after, I realized, holy smokes, this financial market stuff is going to be, this isn't
tougher than you thought.
This isn't going to be for the faint of heart. And I wasn't ready. I was in a place in my life where I could financially and mentally, where I could make that work.
Right.
So I need a job. I need to pay the bills. And so I called up Don and said, oh man, what do I do here? Should I try to get back to WestJet, which I was thinking of doing? And then he mentioned, I knew Enerjet was starting, and he said, well, why don't you go do this and try this? And I said, oh, okay. And he put in a good word for me, and I went to Enerjet.
And Tim hired you right away.
Tim hired me. I think I don't even know if we had an airplane yet. 1 or 2 airplanes.
2008?
2008, the fall of 2008. Because it was kind of like the guys that were working, that he had hired there, were like remember they called them the royal family at WestJet. They were like the top 10 guys that all done great at WestJet. And so they were coming to kind of do it again at Enerjet.
Okay.
Yeah. So, doing workplace movements. Tim had that contract with Suncor, so we were doing a lot of movements up to the oil sands. So I got a job right seat in the 7-3 and did that for a couple of years. Was getting moved to the left seat, and then they lost the oil. Went something happened. I can't remember if like a lot of those in those times happen. They lost the contract or something happened with the contract, and they laid a bunch of us off except for a handful of us, like just a skeleton.
Did Suncor have their aviation department then?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Suncor had an aviation department. I think they had the longest aviation department in history. Like it was
So it'd
going
been around
back
for
like in
years.
the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah. So got laid off from Enerjet. So now I'm out of a job again. And but in that time I'd met Jeff, and Jeff and I were working on aircraft leasing and looking at aircraft financing and stuff like that. And through that I met John the Hopkinsons, which are aircraft brokers.
Yep.
And was in there pitching them on some idea, and they liked me and they wanted me to come help them sell airplanes. So I was like, okay,
you could talk.
Yeah, well, I was like, well, I love finance. I like trading things, and I get to trade airplanes. And so I went into doing that, and I always ended up back flying airplanes. Like I was working for John, and then John's like, well, we need a demo pilot. We'll type you on the citation. So I ended up flying the citation, and I was selling airplanes, and I enjoyed it, but it was much different than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was like going to be this. I thought it was going to be different. You know, you never really know what this stuff is until you do it. But I got to know lots of people, sold a couple airplanes, made a few bucks, and one of the brokers there was the handler for Suncor, and ended up getting to know him, and was like, well, I should just sell airplanes and work again. Cause again, it's like being an entrepreneur is not.
It's a tough business. I can tell you about my business. Yeah. And it's hard, very hard.
And so I have so much respect for people that have done that, and learned a lot about what to do and what not to do since, I've made attempts at doing this sort of thing. But so I met a guy named Justin, and he introduced me some people at Suncor, and they liked me, and they were hiring, but getting a couple more RJs from Bombardier, and got a job at Suncor and did that for flying the RJ for up to the oil sands. Man, it was like my long career job. I think it was 5+ years I was there.
Oh, right on.
And then unfortunately in 2014, they lost they canceled the flight department when oil went to $50 from 100.
That's right. And that's when they signed a contract with WestJet.
Yeah.
To do all their flying for them.
Yeah. I think WestJet still does it.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. Why don't we stop there? Let's take a small break, and we can come back in, say, a minute.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to Flying Minds. If you liked what you heard today, send me a message to chat@flyingminds.com. Okay. Welcome back to Flying Minds with Mr. Warren Norton.
Thanks, Ben.
So we're just talking about China. You're at Suncor, and then you went over and worked for China Express Airlines?
Yeah. Suncor, when they got rid of the flight department, there was a contract, or quite a few contracts in Asia at the time, and a bunch of us went over to fly the RJ for a company called China Express Airlines, based in Chongqing.
Chongqing. Probably butchered that, but...
No, that's pretty much how you say it.
Oh, really?
When I first started coming back and saying, people asked where I worked, and they'd start laughing when I said that because I thought I was making fun of it. But I'm like, no, that's literally the name of the city. And there's like 40 million people there. There's many people in Canada in one city, and we haven't even heard of it.
Wow. Okay, so let's get into the challenges that you faced. Born and raised in Saskatchewan, Canadian aviation, flying small twin-engine airplanes to the MD-83, to the 37NG, the RJ. Now you're over in China. How different was the training over there?
Well, as you can expect, it was eye opening because there's a language barrier. You had an interpreter on board. You had a training captain that didn't speak any English. But a testament to SOPs and procedures, we all were able to do our jobs because we all knew what we're supposed to do when we're supposed to do it. So, but
How long was the training
uh,
before you started flying the line?
it was probably 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah, it was. There was some time off in between, but I think we were there for 6 weeks and then a couple weeks off and then finished up.
And you did all your training in China.
Yeah, everything was in China.
And were the instructors
Chinese?
Chinese?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because we were type rated. We came there with
you're type rated. Oh,
type rating. Yeah. So there was more of it was like an initial, but it was a.
So you had to write the CAAC.
That's exams. Right. Yeah, we had to get our Chinese pilot's license, so we had to do the exam, CAAC exam, written exam. Had to do a certain amount of training, ground school, sim training, and then had to do our, check rides. I remember you had to do there was probably 2 or 3 check rides. I can't remember the exact formula they had, but it was pretty extensive.
Here's a question for you. Did you have to do an English proficiency?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to do one over in Japan too. I was quite surprised. The guy that was testing me was from Japan.
Yeah, had to do an English. Yeah, that's right. Had to do an English test. And then the medicals, of course, were like 2-day medicals. And, half the guys in the ground school got washed out right through the medical because they had something in their blood they didn't like, or simple things as a gallbladder stone or something like that. Or
yeah, I know mine. My medical
high blood pressure.
Yeah, mine was like 2 or 3 days in LA.
Yeah, it was.
And they wouldn't even hire you until you pass the medical.
Yeah, yeah. We had same with us. Our contract. We actually, I think they hired us and put us on half pay, while we went through the training. So that was nice of them. I think that was part of the contract. And then you did your medical in there, and then they did that right away, obviously, because they didn't want to put any money into you before they saw that you could actually get certified there.
Keep the greasy side down.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So we did our medicals and wrote our CAAC exams. And once those were passed, I think they sent us home. I think there was only 2 weeks there, and then we came back a couple weeks later. Once they had the results, they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna invest more money into you, and we'll sign our contracts and whatnot."
Briefly talk about. I mean, you've been an instructor in Canada. You're over there. How different was the training, or was it different?
It was the same structure because it's the same airplanes we fly.
Right.
So, they took a lot of the manufacturer's recommendations, most of them, I would say, and then put their, like we all do, put their spin on things. And that was what was similar. What was different was how they approached it. The approach to their training is very, it's very, what we would call negative training here. Now, what they do there is it's the stick.
Multiple unrelated failures.
Multiple unrelated failures. And you performed and you put under pressure. You fail, your contract's gone, or you're suspended, or you put in the left seat for 200 hours. Sorry, in the right seat for 200. I know a guy that happened to a guy, and you don't really know what's being said. I really enjoyed my time in China, but there was the politics of how the cultural differences went on, and I wouldn't say like the politics in the way that I like China versus Canada. It was just how politics happen when you get 2 people in a room, and they have their way of approaching things, and we have ours, and you either meet them or you don't. And even if you meet them and the guy, they want to get rid of you, they got rid of you.
Yeah, right.
And you never really knew why.
So how much, obviously there was some stress along with that because you weren't sure what was going on, or
Yeah,
did you have a
you
pretty good
quickly
idea
had
whether?
to. It was really cool to see. Well, looking back on it now, you could see there's two types of people that would. There was two types of people that show up there, and one type that would end there long term. The first type, two types is I would say the type that are able to go into a situation and adapt
Adapt is a big word.
quickly.
Yep.
And then there's a type that want their externals to adapt to them. And those type got washed out quickly. There was many of them, guys that just couldn't, and you could see the strain. They just couldn't function in that. And I'm not saying anyone that could do it long term is better. I'm just saying it's different types of personalities. Some people just wouldn't adapt, and what they would think would be compromise past their, I guess, values, they wouldn't do it. They would just be like, fuck this. Sorry to swear, but I'm out of here.
No, that's
And
fine.
and because there was chronic pressure put on you to perform, but you never really knew where the goal posts were.
Well,
And but that said, for the most part, if you didn't care and you were just there to do your job and fly the airplane within, within the SOPs, you did fine.
right, right.
But if you let those external pressures, if you focused on them, it would drive you crazy.
Right. Yeah, I know when I went to fly in Japan, it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in aviation because of the cultural differences and the way that they trained. And, luckily for me, I had a young lad, Spud. I'm going to use his nickname. Spud was his nickname.
Spud.
Spud. If it hadn't have been for Spud, I probably would have left.
Yeah.
Because he was younger. He was very dynamic. He was adaptable. And I got to the point I had family pressures. I
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
young kids. They were all in Canada, and I was over in Japan for months at a time. And, I got to the point where I was ready I've had enough.
Call it. Yeah. Oh, and I went there myself several times, and we just happened to work for, I think, a company like Mark there. They worked for a different company, and it sounded way more stressful than where I worked. Like within China, there was different degrees of what we're talking about. So, I found, and looking back on it now, and it's actually helped me in what what I do today in trading and in the markets, is we can't really control much when you think about it outside of my attitude and the process I approach life. And that's the same in everything. And that helped me. China, all I knew is this is that we had our SOPs, and you just followed them and you did the best you could, because the aircraft, where our conversations were recorded in the flight deck. If we said something out of SOP, you were called. Why are you talking like that? Why are you saying that? Why are you talking below 10,000 feet? If you did something like, for instance, I got a $2,000 R&B fine one time because we got in the airplane. We were a little bit late, so we were sort of rushing. I wouldn't say rushing, but we were hurrying. And this is
keep on sked. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, just to be on
just be on sked. Okay.
And I had a first officer, I had a cadet, I had a maintenance guy, and I had a security officer plus 4 flight attendants for a CRJ 900. So a CRJ 900 crew looked like a 747 crew here in Canada. So we go out to the airplane, the FO does a walk around, the cadet does a walk around, the maintenance guy does a walk around, the security officer does a walk around, and I'm in the airplane, get stuff ready, dealing with the decisions we deal with, and the FO got me to sign the logbook prior to my walk around for the flight, to accept the flight.
So you hadn't checked the aircraft before you signed.
But the airplane had been walked around 4 times already.
Okay.
3 of the times, 2 pilots and 1 mechanic were out of the 4, and they never saw any problems. I signed the logbook, and I was going to do my walk around. The last thing I did, I was just going to jump out and
Right.
walk around and get in and button up, away we go. Well, I signed the logbook and then did my walk around. There's a CAC guy on board, saw that they'd plant these guys apparently, and saw that. And I got back to the airplane and the FO was very quiet. He's like, Captain, we have a problem. This guy, Chinese gentleman, was standing there. Sure enough, I got in trouble. We dealt with it there, got to carry on with our day, but I got a call that night and got a $2,000 RMB fine, which I can't at the time. I can't remember what the conversion rates were, but it was a couple $100 US or something like that. And then a memo went out, and then a memo goes out to the whole company. Captain Warren Norton did not do walk around, like that was the way.
Oh, they gave specifics who it was too.
Oh yeah, your name went out, and it went out on a memo. Like,
lovely.
Like what we think here would be like, oh no, you can't do that here. Oh man, you do that there, and everybody knows. And it was just, so if you couldn't handle that pressure, it would drive you nuts there, because you'd be getting bugged and and it's funny when you look back on it. You really just had to go do your job and have fun, and as long as we were all trained, we're all good pilots who made it through there, and at the end of the day, you got paid well. And like I said, when you got upset, you just opened up your online banking app and looked at the number in there, and that good. Okay, I'll stay one more month.
Right.
And
so you were what, a month in, month out?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And it was pretty good. Well, I would say one of the more flexible contracts.
That's a good gig.
Yeah, it was. And then they had a tiered system that if you stayed more days in and put more time in, you got bigger bonuses, but you weren't required to. That was really an incentive plan for you to stay longer.
Right.
But they were really I had a great time there. That was what I just talked about were the drawbacks. Working in China was month on, month off was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we knew a couple other pilots that did that, and I know several others that worked over there, and they said it was very good.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, some challenges. What were the challenges coming home for that month off?
Well, and I think every pilot's experienced this, but that when you work away and then you come home, the home doesn't change. Everything is going, spinning along. The wife, I was married with a wife and had two little girls, got married while I was in, doing the rotations, and had my first child before I went to China, second child while I was doing the rotations. And so, we kind of adapted to it. I married a girl from Newfoundland, where I think they were raised in kind of the atmosphere where guys went away to work, whether it was out fishing on the sea or went to the oil sands or something. So sort of, we were both kind of suited for the lifestyle. And, but yeah, the pressures were just, you'd come home and, you'd start your relationship over kind of thing. You lived on video chat, at the time, video chat was pretty normal back then. And, wasn't that long ago. It's 2020. So of course it was, or 2017 is when I went over there. And, so
it's hard whether you're working in China or whether you're working in North America. As pilots, we go for 2 or 3 days or 6 days, or, like in China, you're gone for a month. You come home, and now you kind of have to start that whole familial
and
relationship again.
You look at, when you talk, if we're going down that road with relationships, I don't even know that aviation's any different than any other thing. Every other sector or industry, aviation probably has its own strains, but also probably has its own positives on relationships that the 9-to-5 jobs don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But personally, I think, if I had to give anybody any advice about this, is you really got to understand your partner and yourself and your job, and everybody's got to be on the same page of why we're doing this.
Right.
Why are we doing this?
That's good advice. Yeah. Yeah. Because there's a lot of young guys out there going, they see the glamour side of aviation until they get into it. And then they see the schedules and the late nights and the red eyes and the sleeping in hotels and not sleeping, and, food challenges, which, I talked to Michelle Stiles did an interview with her, and she really got into that whole food side of, how it affects us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So you're over there and you did that for 2 years.
Yeah, and COVID hit. COVID hit at that time, and most of the contracts, funny enough, got canceled. Ours was one of the few that never got canceled, but there was a caveat to it. You either stayed in China, no more rotating, but I have to say, I ended up I was off rotation. I was out in Canada when kind of the lockdowns happened.
Right.
So I ended up spending 8 months not working, but they paid me, I think, for 6 of that half pay. And then once I was able to get back in country, I went and did an 8-month tour. So I went to China for 8 months straight.
Oh.
And because there was no more rotation, that was the deal. And there was no jobs, and we were just happy to have a job, right? And yeah, so I look back on that now, and then 8 months was just, it finished me off, and came home, and I went back home for, this is now we're going into, I think, to 2020. And I went back, and in COVID was the lockdown. So to get back into China, you had to spend 2 weeks in a hotel room in lockdown by yourself. You couldn't leave the hotel room for 2 weeks.
And your food was set outside your door.
Like you're in jail.
Yep.
And I did one of those to get back for the first 8-month rotation.
Yep.
And I went home, and I went back, and I went into a city called Chengdu, flew into Chengdu in July. And it was, Chengdu and Chongqing are very close to central China, central South China. And Chongqing's nickname is the fire city because in the summer, it feels like you're in a fire. It's so hot and humid. And Chengdu's not far away from there. So very same climate. We're in a hotel. We get off the airplane, bus to the hotel, put in our rooms, and not allowed to leave. And they wouldn't turn the air conditioning on because they didn't want to circulate the air. And if someone had COVID, we might all get it.
What?
So it was so hot. I lived in the shower, and it was solitary confinement. The food was awful, and you're in the shower most times in the day. And I thought I almost went insane. And I did my 2 weeks.
Now I know why you've got that tick.
I got on an airplane. I got on WeChat. I got myself, somehow this lady that was on the plane, the big little WeChat group for the people on the airplane.
Right.
They finally turned the air conditioning on the 5th day because some pregnant lady almost died.
Oh.
And they turned it on, and they figured by then, well, nobody has it. If they had it, they would have tested, because they came up, I think, every day and screened us.
Oh, she had
tested every day.
Oh.
So anyways, I just was like, I'm done. And I got on a plane from Chengdu, went to Shanghai, and came home and never came back. I haven't been back to China.
Well, how could you live through that? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was ending for everybody else. Like the other guys, I think I came with a couple guys, Joe Strauss.
Joe, yeah.
He was there at the time, and he went.
Dustin was there with you.
Yeah,
wasn't
Dustin. He was already there, I think, at that point, or he'd just come home. I can't remember. He might have still been there. He did a long stint too, and
I'd really like to get Dustin on here. Dustin,
yeah, I was talking to him
listening.
before I drove up here. So yeah, he'll probably come on for sure.
Right on.
Yeah. So anyways, that was it. And it was kind of wrapping up anyways. We were one of the last
So was that in the end of 20 or middle of 21?
That would have been,
it was 2021.
When did Lynx start?
Well, I think
22, right?
Well, they hired the initial first officer group, if I'm not mistaken. In
the fall of 21.
Fall of 21.
Yeah, so
then we started in the winter of 22.
Yeah. So so I'd been talking about Lynx with Jeff.
Yep.
A couple of years before this, because it was kind of all in the works. It was going to happen before COVID, but they didn't launch because of COVID, I think. And then, so anyways, so this was July of 21, and then I came home, and then got the opportunity at Lynx, but I didn't start till January of 22. Yeah, that's how that went.
Yeah. I started there January 22 as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you were right before me. I was like, I think end of Jan.
Yeah, Heat Seeker and I were in the
Heat Seeker.
The Heat Seeker. The Heat Seeker and I were in the January 10th is when we started. So we finished our training, and then literally I went back down to Miami and started training
Yeah.
all you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the rest is kind of history from there.
Yep.
And that was great. Had lots of opportunities there and got to meet, you know, some pretty awesome guys because we were all kind of brought together by COVID.
Yeah.
If you think about it,
Yep.
you know, all of us really were established in large part. A few of us, like a lot of us that went the contract route, were kind of back and looking for the next opportunity. But a lot of the people that were kind of established, like guys at Cathay and Air Canada and this, that, everybody's sort of like thrust into this. Okay, I gotta make some changes here. So where am I going? So this came up and we all got put together. It was really cool to have that level of expertise and experience. So brought together. So I was really lucky. I feel really lucky.
Well, in some ways, COVID was a blessing for the start of Lynx.
Of course, yeah.
Because a lot of those guys that were over in China, a lot of the, our friends from Cathay Pacific that moved back to Canada, we were able to hire this experience. It's vast.
Yeah, well, the level of experience within that first, 50 guys was incredible, right?
Yeah.
When you think about it, you just couldn't get talent like that just kicking around.
Yeah. Before we finish off here, I just want to talk about medicals. Have you had any issues with medicals or trying to find medical, or do you know anybody? Because this is one of the big things that seems to be coming up, guys that I talk to, is just every 6 months we have to do recurrent training. Every year we have to get a medical. So we're always being kind of on edge, just making sure that our careers, head in the right direction. We've always got that pressure. Do you ever had an issue with that or ever?
Well, not really. Like I personally, I've never felt stress until like maybe Asia, there was some stress. I never really even thought about a medical because I was always healthy personally. And I think my personality didn't really worry about too much stuff. I didn't think about stuff to a fault sometimes. The China changed that a little bit because I saw, wow, these guys test for everything. So that was the first time I think, I'd see guys stressed out because and I started to kind of, feel that way a little bit because you had to do blood pressure. And if your guys had these white shirt syndromes where as soon as they'd see a doctor, their blood pressure would go up. Freaking it's psychological. Yeah. And I'd never even heard of this stuff. So I started seeing this. And then of course, just by being around it, you start to like, whoa, well, shit, I got to pay attention here. And and then nowadays, I've been lucky enough that I haven't had to think about that, but I'm 50 years old now. So I'm starting to like, think about what I, and what I eat. And, you do think about our career and the quote unquote airline pilot that goes on the road, all of us have the best intentions to eat healthy, but the world's not set up to eat healthy.
No,
the world's set up to eat shitty. If you think about it, look what's in the airport stores and stuff like, well, anywhere. It's just whatever's convenient and gives me a burst of calories and energy. So usually chocolate bar or something that's got no nutritional value, and you just end up surviving on that stuff.
It's funny you should mention that because when I was chatting with Michelle, she teaches all the young girls or guys that are becoming flight attendants how to prepare. If you're going on a 4-day pairing, prepare properly.
Yeah.
Prepare your meals.
That's smart.
And
that's super smart.
And she really gets into the nutritional value of some of the foods you're going to run into at airports and how it's going to affect your performance.
Well, I think about that now too. And that's great. I really thought that's a great idea Michelle's doing. That's fabulous because you think about how much food we actually need to eat because, Jenna, my girlfriend, she's really into health and stuff. And she lives into fasting and stuff like that. You go on a 4-day trip, you don't actually need a lot of food as a human being. You can give yourself enough food. You could probably pack enough for 4 days, healthy food to feed yourself healthily and actually let yourself fast through that thing. You think about it now. If you were intent on being healthy, it's not impossible. I used to think it's impossible, but it's not.
No,
it's not impossible.
You just have to.
It's actually an opportunity for you to really be healthy because it's an opportunity to fast. Well, here's one of the rules is I don't buy any food. Whatever I eat, I've taken with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You could set yourself some parameters and do it that way. But yeah. But going back into the medical stuff, yeah, like, you see it all the time now. And I would say for me, the most medical thing I've ever had thought about is the psychological part of being a pilot, an aviator, like to be away, to be away, to be alone, to be kind of living out of a hotel, you know, how is that going to affect me?
Isolation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
isolation, or what are my tendencies? Where am I going to go? Because human beings we're communal. We want to be together. We are. It's just it's our nature.
Yeah.
We want our alone time, but we don't want to. We're not isolation. Just most of us. We need that connection piece. So, in hindsight, looking back on my life and my career, if I was, you didn't ask me this, but if I was to give a guy some advice, I would, you know, get to know who you are, know what you like, and then understand what you're about to go out on, and the risk, because everything's a risk. There's risk in everything we do. We think getting a job is risk adverse. To get a job and get a paycheck there's no safety in that. In my opinion, I think, you take a look at, okay, what does it mean to be a pilot? How much money am I going to make? What's my life going to look like? Where am I going to live? Where am I going to be based? What's the company longevity?
Do I have to commute?
Do I have to commute? All these things, you got to take these into, and you have to do this with every single career. But as a pilot, yeah, flying airplanes is a lot of fun. I love it. But personally, I haven't flown an airplane well, I guess I have, but I'm a sim instructor now, and I don't leave the ground, and I love it. I haven't missed it. I'll probably fly again, but it'll be for fun. But personally, that's for me personally.
Right.
So,
so now you're just an instructor now.
Yeah.
And
not just, but
oh, sorry.
well, my ego, I still have ego wrapped up in that identity of being a pilot. Dude.
There you go.
So come on.
Warren, you are an instructor.
No, but all jokes aside, I actually really enjoy, I can say this with the most genuine, thoughts and feelings I can muster. I truly love what I'm doing right now. It's probably the first time my entire career I can say I'm content. Now that's me. I've been a discontent person most of my life, always looking for something else. I think a lot of pilots, I've met a lot that are similar,
very similar,
and that's I think a part of our personality. That's one of the very good things about can be if it's harnessed properly, it can be used for a lot of good. But if it's just left we become, we sit in an airplane, we sit in a tin can doing, 600-700 miles an hour, and we forget what we're doing, and we sit there and bitch about everything because we've got, 10% of our time we're challenged, and the other 90% we're sitting there. Think about it. Yeah. As an airline pilot, for the most part. And
what's the old saying? It's our career is hours and hours of boredom with moments of sheer terror.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
well,
that's my thoughts on the medical stuff. So I know guys that have had to struggled with that, but I've been lucky enough that it's never affected me. For me, it would be more looking at the career from a psychological point of view and go, is this what I want?
Yeah.
Is this, do I think this will be fun? Is this?
I know a lot of guys speaking on the psychological side. There's a lot of individuals, their struggles are sim anxiety. Right? As soon as they have to go back every 6 months, we go for recurrent training, and a lot of guys have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
That's another part of the anxiety or part of the challenge.
That'd be similar to the white coat anxiety, where you're going to be watched, you're going to be tested, you're going to be checked. It's I don't know anybody that doesn't become somewhat stressed out. But one guy, Mark, told me at one time, and I've always thought about this, and he said anytime he's never felt, and I'm not saying this for everybody, but I'd say a large majority of us, if we have a training event going on and we feel some pressure and stress, Mark said this, and I agree with him, because it's every time we're not prepared. I haven't done enough to prepare.
Yeah.
I don't know enough. I know that I didn't do enough. I'm just showing up. And that's not good enough. But there is guys that probably prepare and still have that anxiety and that psychological piece that they need. It's not a thing of technical preparation anymore. It's a thing of I need to go speak to somebody, a professional about where is this fear coming from? What is obstructing me from performing?
Right.
Whereas possibly, for me, I've never had that, but mine would be the other side of it where I just haven't put the effort in because a lot of times things have come easily. And so I could be better. And China actually showed that to me is I became a better pilot because the box that I had to work in was way tighter.
Yeah.
So I had to step up to and I did. And I really saw, and we could see that we can always do a little bit better and we can be, aim small, miss small kind of thing where we can, it's, it's, some might say it's boring, but I don't anymore. And trading's taught me that now too, where I'm almost to the point where I could do this in my life full time. And I don't think I'll ever do that because I got the really great opportunity with Dehavilland where I'm working now, and the two coexist beautifully together. My financial career and my flying career, and they kind of, I couldn't have set it up better. I do believe it's, man,
yeah,
life just works out when we work hard.
Yeah. Well, preparation is a big thing. I know the airline that I instruct for, we send them, the computer-based training. They have to complete that before they come to recurrent training.
Yeah.
Plus, there's a study guide based on the recurrent session that we're doing.
Yeah.
So they've got all the opportunity to study and prepare for the, for the session.
Yeah. And absolutely. I seen it when I was at Lynx and we were hiring lots of guys and you're doing line training and sim training and you show up, and I'm guilty of everything. I'm saying here, I'm guilty. I'm an offender of it all. But you come there and you see the guy's iPad up there and you see his memo thing and he's got 17 memos he hasn't read. And immediately I know right there.
Hasn't looked at it.
Hasn't looked. He hasn't even tried to trick me to think that he's done something.
Yeah.
And you're like, and you realize how little, like when we can get to a level, like if you want to be the best at your craft, that takes a special type of person. I'm not saying I'm that, but I did realize becoming a trainer really takes you to the next level in anything, when you got to teach something.
Yeah.
It really puts the spotlight, because who am I to tell you to do something if I'm not willing to do it?
Exactly.
So I started to realize, well, if you're going to tell this guy to do this, you better damn well make sure that you're doing it.
Yep.
And yeah. And so I think everybody should try to get into that aspect in some, in flying in some way, shape, or form in training, because I think it makes you a better pilot overall. Because otherwise it can be a very boring career. You need something else to that's my opinion, but it can become boring,
well, that's
right?
Why you're
because
here.
you get so good at it, I think, and you become a master at, around, they say 10,000 hours of doing something, you're an expert. And I think we hit that 10,000 hour mark of doing the same thing over and over again. We become really good at it. And, but there's always room for improvement, and training helped me. And now the job I have, I train on a twin Otter, and it's a level D sim, and I love it. Well, I absolutely love it.
Yeah. I'm going to be 66 in a month, and I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Even where I'm at now, I learn every day. And if it's not something that the student does that teaches me going, how could I have not taught that better?
Yeah.
Or maybe I didn't understand the way I should have taught it.
Yeah.
So if you're not always striving to learn, then this job is probably not for you. Let's leave this off with, what would be your parting words to a 1,000-hour pilot wants to fly for the airlines? He's now flying, 172s as an instructor, or he's flying in a 703 job, or now he wants to go fly the airlines. What would be your parting words?
I would say, listen to this podcast, listen to all your podcasts as they come out, and talk to as many people that you want to be like, and find out what they've done that they've enjoyed and what part of it they haven't enjoyed, and see if you fit into that. And don't let yourself, because you don't need to have any surprises in this particular career. There's, just if you want to fly for a living, understand who you are. Because just a simple example would be, do you like to leave home? Are you okay with being away from home all the time? or a lot of the time, or a good part of the time, or half of the time.
Yeah.
If that's a no, then one, you better, okay, now I can work for these places because they stay home.
Right.
And do that, and you'll save yourself. So I personally, if I was to talk to young me, I would tell myself, hey, what do you like? Who are you? What do you want to do with your life? Like what do you enjoy? What do you not enjoy? And then we can do that as creators of our life. We can basically, and aviation's no different than anything else. There's lots of different companies, airlines that are smaller that don't go on 4-day pairings.
Right.
If you don't want to do the contract stuff and be away a long time, if you do, and that's your thing, then the world's your oyster, right?
Yeah.
So personally, I think really know who you are, what you like, and what you're willing to sacrifice.
And research.
Tons of research. And nowadays it's great.
Yep.
Like 20 years ago, we didn't have this sort of, you still did, you could call guys up and talk to them, but it's way more, it's much easier to get the information today with podcasts like this. So
Yeah.
I would do that. I would just really get to know who you are and sit down with a spreadsheet and figure out how much money am I going to make? Like, and it's not all about the money, but figure out how much is a house cost here? How much am I going to make? And how much is my life going to cost me?
Right.
And you can do that with anything now. And if you find out that becoming a pilot isn't going to give you where you really want to go, then you should do something else. But that's for anything. But that's what I would have done differently. I would have looked at it that way. So, because it's a different world we live in now. 20, 30 years ago, get to Air Canada, get a number, get a house and a boat, get in the right city and marry the right girl, and it's awesome.
Yep.
Nowadays, houses are 4 times as much. The pay hasn't increased. I would argue it's probably stayed the same. It's flat. Take a look at that stuff.
Yeah.
Be smart and take control. Those parts of life you can control. You can make decisions that can put you in the right direction.
That's very good advice.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you.
Yeah, man, this is awesome. I'm really, I can just see lots of success, and you're going to help a lot of people, and it's going to be good entertainment for anybody.
Well, I want to thank you for not only coming here today and sharing your story, but you are also one of the individuals that really pushed me to, let's get this podcast going. You got to do it. I'll help you any way I can. And if it hadn't have been for you pushing me, I probably went, maybe some other day. But, I said, okay, let's do it. And, so I want to thank you for always, kind of giving me that nudge. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm happy to. And I'm just, it's awesome that you're doing this and how things start. This simple little conversation, and then you go out, buy some equipment, and next you know, you're on there. And I talked to Luddy when I came down here, and he's like, man, it sounded so awesome. It sounds so professional.
Well, to all the listeners out there, thank you for listening, and we'll get you in the next episode.
Awesome. Thanks, Steph.
You bet.